The Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry says the Palestinian death toll in Gaza now exceeds 10,000 as efforts towards a humanitarian ceasefire so far hit a brick wall in Israel. Israel Prime Minister has rejected any notion of a pause in fighting until Israel hostages held by Hamas in Gaza are released. This as the United Nations Secretary General later today addressed the media on the escalating crisis in the Middle East, and the Security Council convenes in closed-door consultations on the same file. For more, let's speak to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us via video link. Sherwin, good afternoon, South African time, and thank you for joining us at this hour. Perhaps as the conflict now drags on for almost a month, no major diplomatic breakthroughs on a humanitarian pause or ceasefire, which has been a key ask of the United Nations, particularly the Secretary General. What might we expect from him and the Security Council later today?
Maybe a little bit more frustration, Liesl. I think there are many diplomats and many humanitarian officials, certainly at the United Nations, bureaucrats walking around those halls today, feeling quite deflated and frustrated at the escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the inability of the international community to find consensus so that Israel's bombardments of Gaza, its ground offensive, can be brought to heel. So what you will see in New York today is continued diplomatic pressure. The United Arab Emirates and China have requested another emergency Security Council meeting. But as we learned with the evolution of the Ukraine war, for example, where we saw the council meet time and time again, it doesn't necessarily change the calculus on the ground. What it does is it places diplomatic pressure on the parties, in this instance, Israel, Hamas, perhaps the United States, that has been a key interlocutor here in terms of moving this file forward. But what the Secretary General will be asking for later today is to plead with the international community for a desperate humanitarian ceasefire or a desperate pause. That's what his spokesperson told me a short time ago. I said to him, what are you going to say differently today? What can we expect from you? He said, just to reiterate the message that there is a deepening need for a humanitarian crisis, a pause here, a humanitarian ceasefire is what the big ask has been. And so we'll hear more of that. In terms of outcomes from the Security Council, I would temper expectations. Let's lower the bar here. We don't expect much to come out from the Council, except perhaps increased diplomatic pressure, sparring between diplomats. You need to do this. We can't do it as a result of this and that kind of thing. But in terms of the calculus, we need deeper consensus here for the United Nations to really be able to act in this regard.
Sherwin, thank you for that context. Perhaps as we look at the updates, the UN itself provides a daily bulletin on the humanitarian numbers in Gaza. Perhaps you could speak to those numbers, what's coming to the fore, and really what is it reflecting about the overall situation?
Yeah, I think it reflects a situation that has gone from bad to bad to bad, and now much worse and much worse. What you are seeing in terms of the numbers is the Health Ministry of Gaza, the Hamas-controlled Health Ministry, saying at least 10,000 dead now. And of course, we know that hundreds of dead bodies are lying under rubble that has been inaccessible to date. We just received a bulletin from the UN Relief and Works Agency, essentially the UN operation in Gaza. They say 79 of their own staff, essentially UN staff, have been killed as a result of those Israeli airstrikes. 24 have been injured. There are now 710,000 internally displaced persons that are sheltering at these UNRWA facilities, essentially installations. There might be warehouses, there might be schools, not set up to accommodate tens of thousands of people, but over 700,000 people are now sheltering in these areas because they're too scared to remain in their homes because of the unpredictable nature of how these bombs are falling and the escalating death toll. We understand that 77 trucks entered Gaza from the 3rd and 4th of November. So more aid is getting in, Liesl, but not at the scale that is required. Water shortages, fuel shortages, medical shortages, and of course the huge electricity deficit in Gaza is now being perpetuated into almost 1 month now. So the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. So many officials have said it has not improved because the humanitarian situation, the ability of trucks to get in at scale through the Rafah border crossing, is still not happening at this time.
Sherwin, as we assess the humanitarian situation and of course await the outcomes of Security Council, we also heard U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has just concluded some shuttle diplomacy in the region, where Washington is pushing for greater humanitarian relief for Gaza whilst asserting Israel's right to self-defense. It's a tightrope that is increasingly difficult to maintain a balance on. What are we learning now at this point as we speak?
Yeah, the United States has a very unique role in this conflict, Liesl, in that it needs to deliver some of the real asks that the humanitarian community is asking for, because what you heard in the UN Security Council is Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador, basically say we need to allow the diplomatic efforts on the ground to play themselves out. And so you've seen the shuttle diplomacy from Antony Blinken. This is not his first visit to the region. He went to Iraq, he went to Turkey, he went to Israel. First of all, to work on an effort to ensure that this conflict does not expand. You see what's happening with Hezbollah in the north. You're seeing what's happening between Syria and Israel. And there is a real concern that this could become a regional conflict. So in the main, he's there in the region to ensure that this thing does not explode into a regional conflict. But in addition to that, seeking to use the avenues that the United States has with Israel to create some humanitarian gives. It might be a pause, it might be a temporary pause, it might be a broader ceasefire, but it's also then linked to the hostages, right? You hear him saying, he was speaking at a press conference in Iraq over the weekend, and he said, we're working on humanitarian pauses, but this is a process. We are walking and working through specific practicalities of these pauses. And also we need to advance a number of things in that regard. And among those is the release of the over 200 hostages that are still being held by Hamas. So it's a delicate dance that the United States is doing. What the United States needs to be able to achieve is some of the big asks that you're hearing from member states in the UN Security Council, member states at the United Nations writ large, so that he can therefore say, well, look what we've delivered, because we might not support your Security Council resolution, but we've managed to deliver this. So the United States is in a very difficult diplomatic dance, has to deliver on some of the international asks, be seen to be accomplishing something in the absence of working through a venue like the UN Security Council to achieve the same thing.